My friend Omar is one of a kind. He's Syrian, but if you ask him, his heart is secretly Ethiopian. I'm not kidding. The guy escaped the war in Syria, made it all the way to America, and the first thing he does, he finds the best Ethiopian restaurant in town and becomes a regular. He'll look at a plate of injera and Dora Wat with more love than most people look at their own children. He says the food reminds him of a kindness he once found on his journey, a shared meal that felt like a moment of peace in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. It's his happy place, a culinary sanctuary. Our friendship is built on a solid foundation of making fun of Egypt. Don't ask me why, it's our thing. I'll send him a picture of the pyramids and say, "Look, big triangles, so impressive." He'll text back, "My friend, even their falafel is trying too hard, it's all show." It's a ridiculous, pointless joke, but it's ours. This man who has seen the absolute worst of humanity, who has lost more than I can ever comprehend, still finds the energy to argue with me about which country has the superior ancient history. It's his way of staying connected to a world where disagreements are silly and harmless, not matters of life and death. Before the war turned his world upside down, Omar was a university lecturer. Think about that. He was the guy at the front of the classroom, shaping young minds, probably with a coffee in one hand and a book in the other. He talks about his students with this incredible warmth, remembering their questions and their dreams. He wasn't just teaching a subject, he was building a future, one lecture at a time. To go from that life, a life of intellectual debates, of morning routines, of predictable stability, to becoming a refugee is a fall that's hard to imagine. But he never lets the bitterness win. He carries his past with a strange kind of grace. He doesn't hide his pain, but he doesn't let it define him either. He'll tell you the most heartbreaking story you've ever heard, and then, in the next breath, he'll make a joke about his terrible English when he first arrived in America. He once told me he tried to order a sheet of pizza instead of a slice of pizza, and the cashier looked at him like he was a madman. It's this constant dance between tragedy and comedy that makes him who he is. It's his superpower, finding the laughter in the ruins. Omar's wedding night was supposed to be the beginning of everything. He talks about his wife, Layla, like she was a poem he was lucky enough to read. He told me she had eyes that were the color of dark honey, and when she smiled it was like the sun had decided to come out just for him. He said her laughter was the only music he ever wanted to hear. He describes her with such vividness, such profound admiration, that even though I never met her, I feel like I know her. She wasn't just a person to him, she was the promise of a beautiful life, a future that felt safe and full of light. They were married in a small, quiet ceremony surrounded by the few family members who were still in the city. It was a pocket of joy in a country drowning in sorrow. For their wedding night, they saved up for a room in the nicest hotel in their city. It was a splurge, an act of defiance. They were claiming a moment of normalcy, of luxury, in a world that had denied them so much. Omar joked that he felt like a king that night, not because of the fancy hotel, but because he was walking beside his queen. He said he kept looking at her thinking, how did I get so lucky? The hotel room was their little kingdom for the night. He remembers the details with perfect clarity. The crisp white sheets on the bed, the view of the city lights from the window, the way Layla's dress looked as it pooled on the floor. It was more than just a room, it was a symbol. It was their declaration that love could still exist, that beauty could still be found, even when the sounds of war were a constant hum in the background. They were two people building a tiny, perfect world inside four walls, hoping it would be strong enough to keep the chaos out. He told me they just talked for hours, sharing dreams for their future. They planned it all out. They would have 2 children, a boy and a girl. They would move to a small house with a garden where Layla could grow jasmine. They would grow old together, telling their grandchildren stories. It was a simple, beautiful dream. In that hotel room, that future felt so real, so close they could almost touch it. They were on the very edge of their new life, standing at the doorway, ready to step through into a lifetime of happiness. Just as they were about to embrace, to finally begin their life together as husband and wife, the world exploded. It wasn't a distant sound this time, it was immediate, violent, and absolute. The entire hotel shook as if it were a toy in a giant's hand. The beautiful view from the window vanished in a flash of blinding white light, followed by a roar so loud it felt like the sky itself was being torn apart. One moment, he was looking into the eyes of the woman he loved, and the next, the air was thick with dust and the sound of shattering glass. The magical atmosphere was instantly obliterated. The confusion was total. The floor buckled beneath them and the ceiling started to crumble. Omar said his first and only instinct was to reach for Layla, to shield her, but the force of the explosion threw him across the room. He was a lecturer, a husband, a man in love, and in a split second, he was just a body being tossed by a wave of pure destruction. The darkness was absolute, filled with the terrifying sounds of twisting metal and falling concrete. The perfect quiet world they had built just moments before was now a chaotic nightmare of noise and pain. He remembers the feeling of being buried, the weight of the debris pressing down on him. The air was so full of dust that he couldn't breathe. It felt like he was swallowing sand. He called out for Layla, his voice a desperate, choked cry in the suffocating darkness. He screamed her name over and over again, but the only answer was the groan of the collapsing building and the distant sound of sirens that seemed a world away. The silence where her voice should have been was the most terrifying sound of all. It was a void, a black hole where his future used to be. The search that followed was a blur of heartbreak and desperation. For days he dug through the rubble with his bare hands, alongside rescue workers and other frantic family members. He searched for any sign of her, a piece of her dress, a familiar object, anything. He refused to believe she was gone, holding on to a sliver of hope that was getting thinner with every passing hour. He sifted through the wreckage of what was supposed to be the start of his life, but all he found was the dust and debris of his shattered dreams. Layla was never found. When the rescue workers finally pulled Omar from the wreckage 2 days later, he was alive, but he had lost everything. He was bruised, broken, and utterly alone. And to add a final absurd insult to his immeasurable injury, he was completely naked. The blast had torn his clothes right off him. He laughs about it now. A deep, sad laugh that shakes his whole body. "Can you believe it?" he asks me, a glint of dark humor in his eyes. "The war didn't just take my wife and my home. It took my dignity. I was introduced to my new life naked and covered in dust. This story," he says, "is the perfect metaphor for what war does. It doesn't just destroy buildings and countries, it strips individuals bare, exposing them in the most vulnerable, undignified ways imaginable. One minute you are a husband in a hotel room, full of hopes and dreams, and the next, you are a naked man in a pile of rubble, a spectacle of tragedy for the world to see. It's the ultimate violation, a cruel joke played by a universe that has lost its sense of reason. The war exposed him, literally and figuratively, leaving him with nothing but the raw, painful truth of his loss. His ability to laugh at this moment is not a sign that he has forgotten the pain. It's the opposite. It's his way of staring into the abyss of his suffering and refusing to let it consume him completely. The humor is a shield, a small act of rebellion against the overwhelming cruelty of his fate. By turning his most humiliating moment into a self-deprecating joke, he reclaims a tiny piece of his own story. He's saying, "You can take everything from me, but you can't take my ability to see the ridiculousness of it all." And so Omar continues to live, carrying the weight of that night with him every single day. He finds joy in Ethiopian food, he jokes about Egypt, and he tells the story of his wedding night with a mixture of profound sorrow and shocking humor. He knows that war is not just a political event, it's a deeply personal one that leaves scars no one can see. And sometimes, the only way to talk about the deepest wounds is to find the laughter buried somewhere in the rubble, right next to the heartbreak.